in the stories we tell. If you liked the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. In the Year of the Cat, the Great Chu dynasty faced a severe drought. Not only had there been no rain for 3 months, but the heavens were so stingy they wouldn't even grant a breeze. The weather was already sweltering and parched, yet the doors and windows were shut tight. They purposely left only a small crack open, just so the miserable, blood-curdling screams of Grace's 2 personal maids could drift out. Distant, yet terrifyingly clear. The wooden staves struck their spines, which were already covered in mangled flesh and blood. The thudding sounds turned dull and heavy, as if hitting directly against the bone. I knelt on the floor, kneeling until my knees completely lost all sensation. Sweat poured down like rain, my undergarment sticking paste-like to my skin. I reached up to wipe it away, only to realize my palms had been soaking wet for some time. Very quickly, even the faint, final cries from outside ceased. 2 guards ran in to report out of 100 strokes, only 20 had been delivered before Qiuhong and Qiulu stopped breathing. Before they died, they insisted they truly didn't know where the eldest miss had gone. They only said that while they went to boil hot water for the young miss to bathe, she seemed to have evaporated into thin air, vanishing without a trace. The spinal beating is a heavy punishment usually reserved for military camps, used only on soldiers who commit crimes. It strikes directly at the waist and backbone. Even a strong man, if he withstands 20 strokes, will be crippled for life if not dead. Yet today, Lady Margaret ordered Qiuang and Qiulu to receive the full 100 strokes. Qiuhong and Qiulu were first, rank maids who had served Grace since childhood, absolutely loyal. Grace kept no secrets from them. They were closer than biological sisters. Our expenses and clothing followed Grace's standards, which were even 30% better than those of the young ladies from ordinary official families outside. Within the manor, even us concubine-born daughters had to be polite when we met them, addressing them as Sister Qiuang and Sister Qiulu. But in the end, they were still just servants. If the order is to beat them to death, Lady Margaret only needs to lift a hand, and they are dead. Although I'm a young lady of the house, my mother, Ada, started as a lowly foot washing maid in the Marquis's manor. Her status was humble. Only because she gave birth to me was she promoted to a concubine, yet she never received father's favor. She only has me, the 7th daughter, under her knees, with no biological brothers to rely on. All these years, Mother Ada and I have lived precariously among a crowd of other concubines and sisters, always struggling to survive in the cracks. Nominally, we are masters, but how much better could our end be than Qiuhong's and Qiulu's? A chill crept up my spine straight to the top of my head. I could no longer feel even the last bit of the lingering heat. The mistress's pale face radiated an even colder chill. Good. Very good. Every single one says they don't know. My house of Huo has truly raised a pack of useless dogs. I didn't ask you to be loyal enough to die for your master, yet you couldn't even watch over a single person. Will you only be satisfied when we offend the royal family and the entire manor is executed? This pack of dog slaves, if they aren't dead, keep beating them for me. I said 100 strokes, so even if they die, they don't get to escape. Continue beating them hard. 2 guards responded and withdrew, under the gaze of the giant Buddha statue, which stood taller than the roof. The sound of hollow beating rang out again in the guest courtyard behind the main hall. Stroke after stroke fell, but there were no more human sounds. With no strength left to hold on, every stroke landed as if hitting a pile of cotton. Behind me, the maids and nannies dared not cry aloud. Each person trembled like sifted rice, tears and sweat mixing together, fearing the next name called would be their own. At this moment, after pacing back and forth a few times, Lady Margaret suddenly stopped in front of me. "Clara, I heard that before her bath, your eldest sister came out of your room. She was in your room for a full half-hour, and when she came out, her eyes were red." My whole body trembled. I looked up and said, "Mother." A flash of cruelty sparked in Lady Margaret's eyes. She raised her foot and kicked me straight in the shoulder. "You wretched girl, do you have the face to call me mother? Are you worthy?" "I knew it. How could you be so kind-hearted? Tell me, did you incite your sister to run away from the marriage?" "Guards, come here." Guards with blood still on their hands immediately pushed the door open and entered. Terror and despair flooded my heart. When the Empress gave birth to the Crown Prince, the current Emperor personally gave his golden word. The future Crown Princess must be the legitimate daughter of the Hu Manor. Grace ranks 3rd but is the only legitimate daughter of the Manor. Naturally, she is the future Crown Princess. Therefore, from childhood, Grace was raised according to palace standards. She learned music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, possessing both beauty and talent to please the future monarch. She learned to manage servants and account books, holding the power of the household, to be the mother of the nation. Grace did not disappoint expectations. At a young age, she was already hailed as the #1 noble lady in the capital. But who could have guessed that exactly 7 days before the grand wedding, she would disappear without a trace? If she truly left on her own accord, intentionally fleeing the marriage, then for the entire house of Huo, that is the crime of deceiving the emperor, enough to execute 9 generations of our family. This is exactly why Lady Margaret, who usually worships Buddha, has become so cruel tonight. Lady Margaret's phrase, "Do you have the face to call me mother?" implied she no longer considered me father's daughter. If she truly believed this matter was related to me, then my mother Ada and I would likely lose our lives before the holy judgment even arrived. I immediately crawled to Lady Margaret's feet. "Clara knows her mistake and dares not call you mother again." But Lady Margaret, Clara is wrongly accused. Clara absolutely did not incite eldest sister. Grace has a soft and kind heart. She has always cared deeply for her sisters in the manor. Everyone sees this clearly. This time it was because she heard that Clara's mother, Ada, was coughing so much she couldn't sleep at night, and medicine was ineffective. I pressed my forehead to the floor, my voice trembling but clear. Since the great Buddha at Shangguo Temple has always been very efficacious, Clara always wanted a chance to leave the manor to pray for her mother. Grace pitied Clara. So, when she accompanied Lady Margaret to worship Buddha this time, she arranged for Clara to come along. Tonight was simply because she is about to marry deep into the palace. From now on it will be hard to see her parents, and even if she does, it will be separated by the status of ruler and subject, unable to be intimate like now. Feeling sad in her heart, she spoke a few intimate words in the boudoir, unable to hold back her red eyes. I took a desperate breath. Lara absolutely does not have, and dares not have, any thought of inciting eldest sister. Lady Margaret's expression softened slightly. She waved her hand to signal the 2 guards to withdraw. Turning her back so her expression was unclear, her hand wearing a ruby ring wrapped in gold wire gripped the armrest of the Grand Master's chair tightly, veins bulging, but her back gradually hunched, even taking on a stooped appearance. Grace. Did she mention anyone? I knew what Lady Margaret wanted to ask. It was the answer emerging in her heart, the answer she feared most and wanted least to believe. The deep love between the Emperor and Empress was once a legend. After the Empress passed away, the Emperor's health declined day by day. Now with the world facing a great drought, the Holy Heart is even more anxious, and the dragon body is even more uneasy. Consort Victoria and the ministers were spinning around with worry, finally deciding to move the Crown Prince's wedding, originally scheduled for early next spring, up to this very month, to bring luck to the dragon body and pray for blessings for the world. Fortunately, Grace's marriage had been prepared from the moment she was born. Throughout 17 years, everything was already arranged, so they weren't caught off guard. This trip to worship Buddha was also Grace's last outing as a daughter of the Hu family accompanying Lady Margaret. Who knew such a thing would happen? Qiuhong and Qiulu always served closely when Grace bathed, yet tonight she found an excuse to intentionally send the 2 of them away. In the large tub filled with rose petals in the room, mist curled rising from it, yet there were no water splashes on the floor. Her replacement clothes and spare garments were all folded neatly behind the screen, not shifted in the slightest. The doors and windows were closed tight, with no signs of forced entry or damage. Only a small side window, hidden from the light, was not locked from the inside. On the windowsill, there was a scratch, leaving behind a thread of silk from a handkerchief. It was a specific type of silk characteristic of shoe brocade, an inch of silk worth an inch of gold. In the whole manor, only Grace and Lady Margaret particularly loved it and often used it for intimate handkerchiefs. There was a nanny on night watch outside the door. If an intruder had broken in, she couldn't have been completely unaware. The moment I saw the scene in the room, my first reaction was that Grace had climbed out the window and run away herself. A name flashed in my mind. I believe that name was also flashing in Lady Margaret's mind right now. If that were truly the case, then let alone Grace, the future crown princess, the entire Marquise manor would fall into a state of eternal damnation. But gradually calming down, I felt the situation was suspicious. I was just about to answer, no, when unexpectedly, a nanny standing nearby snatched the chance to speak first. Could it be Scholar Chen? Oh no. My heart thumped. That old woman was Nanny Lu, one of Grace's wet nurses and an old servant of the manor. Aside from Kyong and Kyulu, she was the one who understood Grace best. She must have been terrified out of her wits by the fate of Kyong and Kyulu, normally considered steady and experienced. She blurted out the surname of a strange man. Scholar Chen. Nanny Lu mentioned, whose full name is Adrian Chen, is the top scholar currently most sought after in the capital. Adrian is handsome and poised, his appearance matching his reputation, rosy lips and white teeth, with an extraordinary temperament, like fine jade found in snow. 2 years ago, at this very Sangguo temple, Grace and Adrian had a fleeting encounter amidst a sea of people. A year ago, because he was the son of father's old friend, after Adrian passed the exams as top scholar, he visited the manor many times to pay respects. From then on, the two families interacted very intimately. Although father, Lord Arthur, came from a military background, fighting on horseback alongside the emperor to win the empire, he admired pure scholars, so he greatly favored this young man. Moreover, father and Adrian's late father were life and death friends back in the day, so naturally, he was even more willing to support and promote him. He even intended to wait for the concubine, born daughters to reach marriageable age to choose a good one to marry to this scholar Chen. Until early this year, at father's birthday banquet, Grace and Adrian met at the rockery in the inner garden, and were accidentally by Lady Margaret. At that time, I was picking old loquat leaves in the garden, preparing to cook loquat paste for my mother Ada. I happened to encounter Lady Margaret in a furious rage. Panic-stricken, I dodged away, but unexpectedly saw the entire process. Although Grace and Adrian still kept a proper distance, their behavior stopped at politeness, and maids and nannies were present. For families like ours, a private meeting between a man and a woman is already a breach of etiquette. Let alone Grace, who was already designated as the crown princess. I silently cried, "Oh no," secretly blaming the maids beside Grace for being so ignorant. Not only did they not advise against it, but they even intentionally looked around to keep watch. That time, Lady Margaret showed no emotion. She gracefully arranged for the top scholar to leave, and even had Grace help her handle petty matters in the inner court. But after the birthday banquet ended, she immediately turned hostile. She ordered someone to slap Kyuhong and Kyulu's mouths until they were broken, leaving the two unable to speak for months. Although Nanny Lu was old, she was fined half a year's wages and made to do laundry for a month. Since Grace was born, this was the first time she was punished with kneeling. She knelt in the ancestral hall for 3 days and 3 nights, and upon coming out, was grounded for 3 months. From then on, Adrian was not allowed to step foot into the family residence of the Marquis Manor. If there were national affairs, they were only to be discussed at court. At that time, father pitied Grace and regretted the loss of the young man, even blaming Lady Margaret for punishing too harshly. The manor has a large garden. Adrian got lost and coincidentally met Grace. They politely exchanged a few words, and the maids and nannies saw it all. What could happen? Why punish so heavily? But a young girl's awakening feelings and gaze are harder to hide than the coughing of my mother Ada throughout the night. Father is a man who spent his life fighting on the battlefield. He doesn't understand romance, so it's normal he didn't see it. But how could it escape Lady Margaret's eyes? How could it hide from the crowd of female relatives in the inner court with hearts layered like lotus roots? If a word or half a phrase leaked out, damaging the future crown princess's reputation, what would become of propriety? It was just that back then, even Lady Margaret thought it was merely Grace, a young girl yearning for love, momentarily moved by emotion. She had quickly crushed it, thinking it would pass very soon. However, Grace was naturally a round pearl and bright jade. After being grounded, she visibly lost weight to the naked eye, to the point where her clothes became loose, and she even lost interest in tea and rice. I heard that top scholar Adrian, for some unknown reason, also fell critically ill, lying in bed for a whole month before recovering. This news nearly drove Lady Margaret mad, but she could only grit her teeth and pretend not to know, just like during those 3 months of harsh heat, swallowing the boiling anxiety in her heart raw into her stomach. Therefore, when she learned the wedding date was moved up, it actually made her breathe a sigh of relief. From now on, once stepping through the palace gates, there would be no possibility for the two of them anymore. With her mood improved, she then thought of bringing her daughter to Shango Temple one last time. First to pray for blessings, second to fulfill a vow. Who knew this would happen? This was originally a layer of window paper that couldn't be poked through, but Nanny Lu's words just now tore it open straight away, stripped it naked, and displayed it completely before Lady Margaret. Yes, even Lady Margaret suspected this. Otherwise, why were there no signs in the room of being forced or taken away? But the truth is hard to hear, and the person speaking the truth naturally looks like an eyesore. Lady Margaret didn't turn around. Her voice seemed to carry a fake gentleness. A string of Buddhist beads was half clutched in her palm as she straightened her back and stood up. Nanny Lu, since you mentioned Scholar Chen, do you have anything else you want to say? Nanny Lu thought there was hope for survival. Her face revealed joy as she hurriedly reported. Those two lowly wenches firmly refused to speak, but this old nanny knows. The day before coming to Shango Temple, Qihong and Qulu took a food box out of the manor, saying the young miss wanted to eat peach blossom cakes from the Fang Qi shop. But this old nanny paid attention, and clearly saw the carriage heading toward the West Market. Lady Margaret, isn't Adrian's Imperial granted residence right in the West Market? If we immediately send someone to the Chen residence to demand her back now, we will surely have news of the young miss. I closed my eyes in despair. By speaking this way, Nanny Lu was practically publicly declaring to the world that the future crown princess had a private affair with the top scholar. Lady Margaret finally turned around. For a long time, she sat still with lowered eyes, the beads beginning to rotate in her palm. When she opened her eyes again, they held a coldness like a lightning strike. Guards. Still the same two guards, named Dawu and Xiaowu, responded and entered. They were orphan twins who grew up in the military camp, now Lady Margaret's most capable henchmen. Nanny Lu fabricated lies, slandered the legitimate daughter of the Marquise Manor, the future crown princess. She should have been beaten to death directly, but considering she was once the young Mrs. Wet Nurse, cut out her tongue and sell her off. My chin trembled uncontrollably. A scream as tragic as a slaughtered pig rang in my ears. Very quickly, the screaming outside the door, after a gurgling sound, abruptly went silent. Lady Margaret's voice seemed to come closer. Beside my ear, it was like a demon's whisper. Clara, among the concubine, born sisters, Grace likes you best. She often mentions to me that you look simple, but actually, you are keeping your brilliance hidden to survive. Born with a heart of 7 orifices. So tell me, where do you think your eldest sister has actually gone? This was a life, or death question. Qihong and Kulu were both born servants of the house. Their parents and brothers were all working in the manor. The two of them had thought it through, so their hearts were iron, hard with determination. Whether they spoke or not meant death, so they might as well risk it for a reputation of loyalty, preserving the lives of their families and their rice bowls in the Marquise Manor for the future. Nanny Lu spoke the clues that were truly useful, but she touched Lady Margaret's reverse scale. She kept a remnant of her life but fell into an end worse than death. Now, Lady Margaret's intention is that we must find Grace, but absolutely cannot let it involve any strange man other than the Crown Prince, Prince Edward. We cannot damage the reputation of Grace and the Marquise Manor. Before returning to her room, Grace had sought me out to talk. Her words were full of uneasiness about life in the deep palace in the future. Hidden sorrow was tucked between her brows. 7th sister, to speak a heart-wrenching truth, I am actually a bit jealous of you. I am the legitimate daughter, the imperially appointed crown princess. Although pampered and raised by the Marquise Manor, appearing to lack nothing and admired by all, in reality, I am the most uncomfortable person. Every word and action of mine represents the Marquise Manor, and even the royal family. Therefore, from childhood, I was taught to be a model for the women of the world. I must be excellent everywhere, cautious in speech and action. Day after day, being stared at by people, fearing that just one wrong step means eternal damnation. So I can only take every step cautiously as if walking on thin ice. Moreover, the crown prince, eldest sister. I hurriedly cut her off. Mother Ada once said, people in families like ours must be cautious in speech and maintain silence. Let alone between sisters, even before a skylark, we dare not speak much. Grace forced a bitter smile and stopped the story. She pushed open the window, seeming to want to breathe some air. But there wasn't even a breeze, only feeling stickier and more suffocating. The moonlight shone like a ribbon of silk on her thin figure, only then reluctantly bringing a trace of coolness. Among the sisters in the Marquise Manor, only when facing you can I speak a few words from my heart. Later, even if I want to speak, there will be no chance, yet you still stop me. I know Mother is powerful and holds the household authority. Her methods have always been thunderous. The concubines and sisters in the manor are suppressed enough. The days are hard to bear. But after all, you are father's flesh and blood. You have Mother Ada to love and protect you. If you have worries, you can nestle in her arms and confide. She continued softly, later, if you like a gentleman from some family, you won't surpass me. And Mother definitely won't make it difficult. The world is naturally wider the further you go. Currently, the world is in a great drought. I hear commoners in many places are displaced and homeless. I shouldn't be sad because of my own thoughts at a time like this, but just thinking that my world will hereafter be locked tight by those three Shanghai red walls. I still can't help it. In Grace's words, she indeed mentioned not wanting to enter the palace, yearning for freedom. The crown prince was not the person in her heart. My mind spun with 100 thoughts. When I looked up, I had already suppressed my tears, my gaze determined. Lady Margaret, what kind of person is Grace? You know better than anyone. How could she disregard the lives of the entire manor? Father, you, and a crowd of brothers and sisters. Grace carries the phoenix destiny. Even when chatting with Clara about boudoir matters, she still worries about the commoners. Even telling Clara where the drought is severe, and where relief and herbal soup are being distributed. A sister like that would absolutely not flee for her own personal desire right when the grand wedding is approaching, taking the opportunity to run away. Lady Margaret's expression changed. These words are not wrong. Grace has the big picture in her heart. She has always prioritized the greater good and rarely makes others worry. Lady Margaret looked at me, her brow slowly relaxing, but still carrying a trace of scrutiny, as if wanting to see through exactly how much sincerity I had. Then how do you explain the situation before our eyes? She has been gone for 3 or 4 hours. We can see dawn is coming, but the number of people we brought this time is only so many. Everyone we could question has been questioned. Everyone we could beat has been beaten. Yet we still haven't asked out a single thing. Lady Margaret's tone had clearly softened. I seized the opportunity. Lady Margaret is confused by worry. But think about it, Grace has been served by maids and servants for every move since childhood. When has she ever gone out alone? Let alone doing something that deceives the heavens and crosses the sea. If she fled the marriage alone, I'm afraid she wouldn't have even found the way down the mountain before being caught and brought back. Even if she luckily escaped down the mountain, the people father sent to search inside and outside the mountain would surely have news by now. Lady Margaret furrowed her brow tightly. So there is someone aiding and hiding Grace. The conclusion circles back to the beginning. No, I said, my thoughts racing. Grace did not leave voluntarily, or at least not willingly. No matter how it was done, Grace was definitely taken by someone with intent. Since there is intent, there must be a plot. Since there is a plot, it's impossible not to leave a single trace. Lady Margaret finally believed a few more degrees, starting to think along with my words. But we have checked the room. If there was sleeping incense or someone forced their way in, it's impossible not to have discovered it. I pondered for a moment, turning every word Grace said that evening over and over in my heart. If it weren't for Grace inviting a famous doctor for my mother, her illness wouldn't know how long it would be delayed. Her private savings were also donated for relief. A person like that still knows to care for unrelated people, let alone her marriage, which is tied to the life and death of the whole manor. Even if she really didn't want to enter the palace, I absolutely do not believe she would disregard others for her own personal feelings. Although Lady Margaret is powerful, she has always been known for virtue among the mistresses of the inner courts, believing in Buddha and eating vegetarian. No matter how strict, she doesn't want to force people to death. But today she used harsh words, not sparing blood, taking several lives. In reality, it is because in her heart she has determined that the thing she fears and dreads most has happened. But what if the truth is not like that? Just overturning that conclusion, the perspective on the problem will be completely different. I knelt straight up and spoke. Lady Margaret, may Clara go to eldest sister's room to look one more time? My room is near Grace's room. Hearing the scream, I led my maid Yinj and hurriedly ran over to check. The room was tidy and organized. The rear wing rooms of Shangguo Temple are not as spacious as the rooms in the Marquis Manor. One glance takes it all in. The windows were shut tight, and there wasn't even a shadow. Lady Margaret led people rushing over to search inside and out, but still, there was nothing. At that time, Yinj's face was deathly pale. She stood behind me and tugged gently, her voice trembling as if she were about to cry. She whispered, "Seven, miss. The third miss. Did she run away?" I hurriedly covered her mouth. Do you not want to live? Listen carefully, from now on, not a single word is to be spoken. Even the first reaction of the maid beside me was like this, let alone others. I fear that back then, even the loyal and devoted Kyuhong and Kyulu thought the same, so they would rather be beaten to death, gritting their teeth, and saying they knew nothing. Lady Margaret had resolved to take their lives. Cutting out Nanny Lu's tongue was actually to silence her. But now, both of them have been beaten to death with staves. What exactly did they do in the West Market the day before? Who did they meet? Now, even if we wanted to ask, we can no longer ask. When Lady Margaret stepped out of Grace's room, there was not a drop of blood left in her face. She had to be supported by a nanny, her steps somewhat unsteady. The rear wing rooms of Shangguo Temple in the deep of night were momentarily lit up as bright as day. It seemed one could see the giant Buddha towering on the mountainside, gazing down with compassionate eyes, silently watching everything happening here. All servants involved were dragged out and beaten. Tragic screams were endless. Grace's personal maids were beaten until they stopped breathing on the spot. Everyone appeared to be kneeling on the ground, but in reality, they were kneeling in a frying pan of oil, watching the fire lick toward them bit by bit, not knowing when. Just by saying one wrong sentence, they might be burned to ash. This was the second time I entered Grace's room. Behind the screen, the water in the wooden tub, originally misty, had now gone cold and the fragrance had faded. Behind the screen was a double-sided embroidery piece that was only half finished. Grace intended to finish embroidering it before her wedding to give to Lady Margaret to display in her room, so that when looking at it daily, it would be as if her daughter were still by her side. The lamb kept its eyes tight shut, lifting its head to kneel on the ground. Only the mother goat's tear-filled eyes were unfinished. Grace once said, "The eyes are the most crucial part of this embroidery." I bent down to look very carefully. The silver needle was habitually pinned in the bottom right corner. That was Grace's familiar movement. The thread lines and veins were interwoven intricately, showing that the mood of the embroiderer at the final moment was extremely calm and focused. Whether it was the maids or the nannies on night watch, they all said that before bathing, they saw Grace light the lamp and concentrate on embroidery. This is fundamentally not the state of mind of someone planning to flee a marriage or elope. The small window where the shoe brocade thread was snagged faced the uninhabited North Mountain. It was originally locked dead from the inside and could only be opened from the inside. Pushing it open revealed a patch of shaded grass and trees, which then connected to the mountainside. Not only outside the window, but also the roof, Dawu and Xiaowu had climbed up to inspect thoroughly. On the mountainside, there is a small path swept by the monks for convenience, formed by frequent trampling. It is extremely difficult to walk. On that path, a branch had snagged Grace's scent pouch, embroidered with red plums standing proud in the snow. Grace had embroidered a pair of these with her own hands. One was on Lady Margaret. This one belonged to Grace. It absolutely could not be mistaken. The ground was dry and cracked due to the drought, so no footprints could be traced, but there was a patch of trampled branches, an area about the size of a water jar, very clearly visible. On the way down the mountain, there were distinct male footprints, but this small path was only known after questioning the sweeping monks in the temple. How could Grace have known about it? Even if Grace truly knew and climbed out the small window to run up the mountain along the path, from the time Kyuhong and Kyulu went out to fetch water until the night watch nanny discovered Grace was missing, it was only the time of half a cup of tea. Lady Margaret immediately made a decisive decision to seal off Shangguo Temple. Even the abbot was alarmed. Even if someone was aiding her, even if she grew wings, she couldn't fly out. Then, my spine began to feel cold. Grace is very likely still hidden within the temple. After dismissing all the servants, at this moment, only Lady Margaret and I remained in the room. Lady Margaret lowered her eyes to look at me kneeling on the floor. According to what you say, is there an internal thief in Shangguo Temple? But Shangguo Temple is the national temple. The rear wing rooms only receive royal relatives and the nobles of marquises and general households. The monks are all registered and managed by the inner court. How would they dare to act recklessly? I know time is tight and we can't think too much. If it were the monks in the temple, naturally they wouldn't dare. But Clara has heard that in recent years, Shangguo Temple's incense has been extremely flourishing. Especially the vegetarian food, which is praised as a unique wonder. Gourmets flock here daily, to the point where supply cannot meet demand. The reception monks in the temple hired quite a few fire worker Taoists from outside, shaved heads but not ordained. They usually stay in the temple, mainly responsible for the back kitchen, sweeping, transporting vegetables and fruits, and laundry. I paused to let the implication sink in. The wages of these people are paid by the temple, not belonging to the inner court. The turnover is high. Their population is not registered. Tracking and interrogating them is extremely difficult. Currently, although Lady Margaret has sealed Shango Temple, Abbot Huiyan only thinks the female relatives lost an item and the Marquis Manor had a household thief. If we wait until morning, the temple will inevitably light fires to cook. If they hide Grace in the fire, worker Taoist's wooden cart, using vegetables and fruits to cover the eyes and slip through, then it will truly be too late. Lady Margaret suddenly stood up, but she hesitated, unable to make up her mind. The grand wedding is approaching. This matter concerns Grace's reputation and also the royal family's reputation. Absolutely no news can leak out, not even a bit. But if we don't explain the truth to Abbot Huiyan, and just search the monks in the temple like this, how would he agree to nod his head? Indeed, we cannot say. Even if the abbot of Shango Temple is highly respected and virtuous, even if he knows when to advance and retreat, the fact that things have reached this point shows that among the people under him, I'm afraid dragons and snakes are already mixed together. Unless we devise a plan to push the responsibility onto Shango Temple, making them unable to avoid it even if they wanted to. The abbot only knows something is lost, but doesn't know what is lost. But what if the lost item is the East Pearl bestowed by the late Empress to Grace? That is the item that must be attached to the Phoenix crown on the day of the grand wedding. Didn't father go to request the decree to allow the crown princess to marry from Shango Temple? This is a heaven-sent grace for Shango Temple. Lady Margaret might as well ask Abbot Huiyan on, if on the day of the grand wedding the East Pearl is not seen, and the emperor questions it, saying it was lost in Shango Temple, then how will the entire temple, top to bottom, be dealt with? In Lady Margaret's eyes, determination finally settled. Right at that moment, she suddenly leaned down and squeezed my chin, staring unblinkingly, yet there was no familiar cruelty in her eyes. Your mother Ada was also once the pearl in the palm of a clean, stream official family. It is a pity your grandfather was the head of the pure stream faction, but being too rigid makes one easy to break. He offended powerful officials, and the whole family was exiled. She was sent into slavery, which is how she fell to become the lowest foot, washing maid in the Marquis Manor. Although she has a beautiful appearance, her temperament is just like your grandfather's. To be a concubine, one must be soft and pleasing. What the Marquis hates most is that hard stubbornness. She released my chin but held my gaze. You should advise her. If she can change a little, she wouldn't have to live so bitterly. But she raised you well. Your eldest sister did not misjudge you. Stand up. From now on, continue to call me mother. Having spoken, Lady Margaret immediately called for Dawu. She had Xiaowu lead over 100 internal servants who had signed contracts to run straight to the front courtyard of Shango Temple. Inside the temple, no one, whoever they were, was allowed to leave a half step. Starting from the kitchen, every single room was searched carefully, one by one. Meanwhile, Lady Margaret went directly to the abbot's quarters to report the theft of the East Pearl, and presided over the search with Abbot Huiyan. This night was ultimately a sleepless one, yet until the sky brightened, no trace of Grace was found. However, in a room where a fire worker Taoist stayed, a piece of paper wrapped in a shoe brocade handkerchief was discovered. On the paper was written a single line, 10-mile pavilion. Midnight the day after tomorrow, 5 million taels in commercial banknotes. When that piece of paper was discovered, the large teapot in the room still had residual warmth, just one step too late. Lady Margaret took the paper, examined it 3 times under the firelight, then stood up, held her forehead, and momentarily overcome by a rush of anger attacking her heart, she fainted directly. Grace, the daughter of a marquis, the future crown princess, had been kidnapped. It wasn't until noon after the sky brightened that Father, Lord Arthur, could rush back to Shango Temple. When the emperor heard that Grace wanted to pray for the royal family and beg for rain for the commoners, and would marry from Shango Temple, he praised her for having the style of the late empress and was very pleased. Sickly as he was, the emperor, dragging his sickly body, detained Father in the inner palace to share breakfast together. Father was burning with anxiety like fire, but had to pretend nothing was wrong, forcing himself to endure until the meal was finished. He didn't take a carriage, but rode a fast horse, first disguising himself to circle past the West Market, then galloping straight back to Shangguo Temple. To avoid outsider speculation, the news that Grace would marry from Shangguo Temple had been released. With the royal family nodding approval, heavy troops were stationed merely to ensure the safety of the crown princess before her wedding day, perfectly justifiable. Therefore, although the main gate of Shangguo Temple was open, soldiers guarded strictly, allowing entry but no exit. My worry was confirmed. When the temple was sealed, several fire worker Taoists pushed carts out to buy supplies right on time, passing through smoothly. Among them was one fire worker Taoist who looked very thin, with clean white skin, unlike the other fire worker Taoists who were strong and sturdy. Since he was going out to buy supplies at the right time, he didn't arouse anyone's suspicion. Lord Arthur stood before Lady Margaret's bed, pacing back and forth anxiously. "Investigate for me. Drag that fire worker Taoist out here. This Marquise will hack him into 10,000 pieces." The commotion had reached this level, and there really was a thief in the temple. Xiangguo Temple and Abbot Huyan were also in a panic. The National Temple had an internal thief, who successfully stole the East Pearl bestowed by the late Empress. The temple immediately became as chaotic as a pot of porridge, sounds of beatings and torture rang out endlessly. Inside the inner guest room, Lady Margaret had woken up. Amidst the intense heat, she felt her whole body turn cold. Her forehead was wrapped with a headband as she purposely called someone to summon me in. Lord Arthur glanced at me once, his gaze not lingering. Lady Margaret held her head and thumped her chest hard. 5 million taels. 5 million taels. How can our Maynard gather 5 million taels in a day and a night without anyone knowing? And it must be commercial banknotes. What do we do now? Although Grace hasn't been found, at least there is a clue. At least the most terrifying possibility of elopement has been ruled out. However, this matter is overly strange. Since it is for money, and the layout was calculated so exquisitely, able to quietly take away the future crown princess under everyone's eyelids, why ask for a number that is completely impossible to fulfill in such a short time? Lord Arthur slammed his fist, the iron fist nearly smashed the pure wood tea table. Don't speak of 5 million taels, they won't even get 5 copper coins. I am Lord Dinyuan. How can I listen to the threats of treacherous thieves? Tonight, I will personally lead troops to surround the 10-mile pavilion inside and out. As long as they dare to come, they will surely come but never return. Lady Margaret was so angry she gasped for breath, but it wasn't convenient to get angry at father, so she could only suppress her urgent fire and advise him sorrowfully. Then what about Grace? Lord Huo, daughter, are you not going to care about her anymore? If people know she was taken by bandits, fell into a den of men, can she still be explained clearly? Lord Arthur threw down his sword in anger and slumped onto the edge of the bed. Then what do you say we should do? Right now we can still hide it from outsiders by claiming the East Pearl is lost, but what about the day of the grand wedding? How do we answer to the royal family? The room fell into a deadly silence. Dealing with a bunch of bandits, for my father, the Marquis of Dinyuan, a founding famous general, it is like stepping on an ant. The difficulty here lies in the word, secret. Lady Margaret's hand tapped nervously and heavily on the yellow rosewood tea table on the bed. Calling you in here, is it to watch the excitement? If you have an opinion, speak up. Clearly, this sentence was spoken to me. Lord Arthur raised a high eyebrow. Are you anxious to the point of confusion? She is just a child. Why ask her? I had no choice but to bow and pay respects. Father, mother, actually, it is not necessarily impossible to have a way to satisfy both sides. Lady Margaret's eyes lit up, looking at me almost pleadingly. Good child, Clara, speak quickly, speak quickly. Servants. Serve tea to the 7th miss. They said serve tea, but the nannies brought a high chair, a tea table, along with tea and pastries. I dared not sit down. In the room of Lady Margaret and father, there had never been a place for me to sit. I only took the teacup and placed it on the table. Father, mother, Grace once privately taught Clara that although a daughter's body is in the boudoir, her heart cannot be wrapped in just 1 square inch. In recent years, the North has faced consecutive droughts. It is only because the court's relief efforts were effective that the natural disasters did not turn into a great catastrophe. But this year, the disaster in the Two Rivers region is heavier than in previous years. The court intends to renovate the rivers. If water is plentiful, guide it to the sea. If shallow, divert it for irrigation, removing the disaster from the root. I continued carefully. It is a pity the national treasury is tight. So at the end of last year, There was an intention to open a policy for the Confucian merchants of Jiangnan, opening doors for convenient business while gathering silver to fix the rivers. Lady Margaret looked at me, but said nothing. On the contrary, father didn't understand the beginning or end, his face showing impatience. These words are not wrong. Currently, there are several wealthy tycoons who entered the capital to face the saint and are in the city. But what does this have to do with saving Grace? I lowered my head to weigh my words. Clara heard that the amount of silver to be publicly raised this time is exactly 5 million taels of white silver. If father, the Marquis of Dinyuan, privately went to meet those merchants, then these 5 million taels of commercial banknotes could ostensibly solve the problem. A gust of wind brushed past my ear. If Lady Margaret hadn't stopped him, father's slap would have nearly fallen on my face. Lady Margaret's voice is urgent. She hugged father's arm tightly. Lord Huo, please listen to Clara finish first. Father's neck was flushed red. Listen to what? I should beat this girl who doesn't know the height of the sky and the depth of the earth to death. What kind of concept is 5 million taels? Even if we sell the entire Marquis Manor clean, including your dowry, I'm afraid we'd barely get half that number. And even if the Marquis Manor truly sold all deeds, servants, and land, it would take at least several months. How could it be completed in one day? This is clearly an impossible problem. But the problem is laid out, and Grace is currently a hostage in the other party's hands. So how can we not do it? At least we must put on an appearance of cooperating. My proposal was indeed improper, but it was the only way before our eyes to solve this difficult problem. I naturally know that military generals hold troops and merchants hold silver and grain. What the royal family taboos most is these two identities having private relations. If father really gave me a slap, I wouldn't even have the right to dodge. Of course, we don't need to truly beg, we just need the news to spread. Father just needs to go with great fanfare to meet the merchants at the tea house. Father doesn't need to open his mouth to say anything, just drink tea with them for half a day, to let the kidnappers believe that the Marquis Manor has disregarded everything to gather enough ransom for them. With that sincerity, outside the city at 10 Mile Pavilion, father can then find a way to set up an ambush. With father's ability, as long as they dare to show their faces, they will surely be like fish in a jar. Wait until Grace is rescued. It won't be too late for father to punish Clara then. Finally, father reluctantly withdrew his hand. But they are merchants. If this spreads, I replied, father, urgent times call for urgent measures. Once Grace is rescued, father can personally go into the palace to plead guilty to the emperor, explaining the twists and turns within. Naturally, it will be. Father frowned and thought for a long time, finally nodding. Right now, this is the only way. I finished speaking and was just about to bow and withdraw when Lady Margaret's gaze suddenly locked onto me. Clara, were those words about fixing the rivers really taught to you by Grace? I lowered my eyes and curtsied. Mother, naturally so. That night, Lady Margaret and I stayed at Shango Temple to wait and pray for the departure. The butler and servants ran back and forth continuously, delivering banquet invitations to the several Confucian merchants who had entered the capital, inviting them to meet at the Flower Moon Tea House tonight. The Marquis of Dinyuan's prestige is illustrious, trusted heavily by the royal family. Besides, who in the capital doesn't know the wedding date of the Marquis's legitimate daughter to the Crown Prince is near? Although they felt somewhat apprehensive in their hearts, they ultimately accepted the invitation to attend. That night at the Flower Moon Tea House, they drank tea for a whole night and watched beauties dance for a whole night. With generals guarding outside the door, no one knew what was said or done inside. One could only hear the sound of silk and bamboo music echoing into ears from afar. The next morning, as soon as the sky brightened and the banquet dispersed, father, having stayed awake all night with eyes red as blood, went immediately as if to battle, beginning to set up the ambush at 10 Mile Pavilion. Waiting until the hour of Z, there was still no wind. Lady Margaret looked up at the moon in the sky. That tilted shadow looked almost exactly like Grace the day before. In just 2 days, her body had visibly thinned to the naked eye. The incense in the courtyard, the smoke rose straight into the air, then gradually faded. The hour of Z had arrived. On father's side, no matter what, there should have been a result. Beside my ears, it seemed I could hear sounds echoing from 10 Mile Pavilion dozens of miles away, but for a moment, I couldn't distinguish what emotion that should be. Lady Margaret looked at the final pile of incense ash, tilted her head, her gaze glued to the door of the rear row of rooms at Shango Temple. never leaving. When she opened her mouth, her voice carried a slight tremor. Clara, do you think your eldest sister is on her way back? My heart had no certainty, but I couldn't not answer. Mother, how much silver did our national treasury take in total last year? Lady Margaret sighed. Last year, the total intake was 50 million taels. But the north had drought, the south had floods, and in the latter half of the year, the northern Qiang invaded. Your father and 2 legitimate brothers won the battle, but the consumption of military provisions made the already empty treasury even more difficult. This year has seen 3 consecutive months without rain. I fear it will be even harder. I also can't figure it out. What kind of bandit is so aggressive as to dare kidnap the crown princess and open their mouth to demand 1/5 of the entire year's national income? It is too abnormal. Correct, if father successfully catches the bandits, everything will be considered settled dust. But if not, I fear great chaos will occur. From the distance, the sound of galloping horses tearing through the wind arrived. Hearing this sound, it didn't seem like Dao riding to deliver a message, but rather like my father, the Marquis himself, returning. Why back so soon? Lady Margaret's nails dug deep into her flesh, even I was so tense I forgot to breathe. Following Lady Margaret's hurried steps out to welcome him, as she walked, she unconsciously called Grace's name softly. Amida Buddha Grace, my Grace. But as the door opened, we only saw father walking in with huge strides and a face full of fury. His riding whip was thrown violently aside. A sigh full of grievance burst from his chest. My heart thumped. Lady Margaret and I stood frozen in place at the same time. Clearly, she wasn't rescued, but the actual situation was even worse than imagined. Father said they ambushed for the whole night, let alone Grace. Not even a shadow of the bandits was seen. It wasn't until the hour of Z had passed. Father waited patiently for a long time, finally unable to hold back. He sent someone into the pavilion to investigate. As a result, they discovered that inside the pavilion, there was only a rock pressing down on a scrap of silk, wrapping a piece of paper. In the paper, it was written, "Tomorrow, outside the city at the courier station, we invite the Marquis to come alone. 10 million taels in commercial banknotes." The other party must have discovered father's ambush, so they changed the location and time. Not only did they double the ransom, but they also demanded father go alone. Bullying people too far. Bullying people too far. Father's fist, the size of a bowl, smashed straight down onto the stone table in the courtyard, cracking the tabletop. This Marquis must report to the Holy Majesty. Post notices to mobilize troops. Catch all these bandits and execute them by slow slicing. Those were just words spoken in anger. Posting notices is easy, mobilizing troops is also easy, but the opponent grasps precisely that the Marquis manor will grit its teeth to hide this news, fearing, throwing at the rat but breaking the vase. So they let them manipulate us. Lady Margaret was actually calmer than I expected. Lord Huo, go ahead and report to the Holy Majesty. Let the whole world know that before the grand wedding, our Grace fell into a bandit's den, fell into a den full of men. Let the whole world discuss whether the crown princess about to marry is still chaste or not. Father slumped onto the stone bench in dejection and grievance, holding his forehead in headache. Then what do you say we should do? What to do? The cold moonlight shone down on the garden. Lady Margaret said listlessly, just do as the bandits say. Nearly the whole manor went another night without sleep. Father was still somewhat all right, but Lady Margaret had begun to show signs of rapid, uneven breathing. She coughed more and more, but stubbornly dared not invite a doctor, fearing it would lead people to suspicion, so she just forced herself to endure. The less you know about this, the better. Fortunately, I am most accustomed to taking care of people with asthma. There are tribute piers in the temple and old loquat leaves on the mountain. Both can treat asthma. I stayed by the bedside to keep her company, caring closely so she could rest as much as possible. If this continues before Grace returns, she will collapse first. Lady Margaret's attitude toward me gradually carried a few degrees of sincerity. Actually, surviving in this inner court, compared to the men rampaging in officialdom and the marketplace, is not much different. When you fall into a weak position, you are someone begging for money to live, you must have a support. Only if someone who can speak effectively supports the situation, is willing to help you, promote you all, will your days get better and better. Don't feel wronged, the rules are inherently like this. Unless one day you stand at a high place, stand right where the rules are set. Early the next morning, father held another banquet to entertain the merchants. The people beside Lady Margaret went out to scout for news. This time, Lord Dingyuan's successive unusual actions finally spawned rumors. Some began to speculate about father's overly close association with merchants. Fortunately, no one has yet connected it to the Crown Prince's wedding. Matters have priorities. Before our eyes, we must rescue Grace first. After the grand wedding, father will naturally give the royal family an explanation. Weighing the two harms, father had no other choice. That night, father went alone to the courier station outside the city. When he returned, the veins on his neck were bulging. Still only a piece of paper. This time, the number doubled again. Father had set up the situation long ago. Even a fly flying past couldn't slip through, but at every designated location, absolutely no one appeared. The paper had been placed there in advance, demanding astronomical figures that were impossible to fulfill, yet the bandits were never seen, not even a shadow. Clearly, this was an intentional mockery. The other party was fundamentally not after the person, nor the money. Then what do they want? Father was so angry he laughed. Even a fool could see there was a problem. Father changed into battle robes, grabbed his red, tasseled spear, and called for his horse to be prepared. At that time I was also present, but Lady Margaret no longer cared about face. She blocked the horse directly and collapsed to her knees before him. My lord, go one more time. Just one last time. What if, consider it my begging you. If this bursts into the open, our daughter's whole life will be considered ruined. I will kneel with you. Father looked at Lady Margaret, whose face was drenched in tears, sighed heavily and irritably, and finally softened his heart. Perhaps thinking of the rumors caused by his frequent drinking with merchants these past few days, to avoid making the Holy Heart suspicious, Father stayed up all night drafting a memorial. As soon as the sky brightened and the palace gates opened, he entered the palace to face the saint and explain. At the time designated by the bandits, Lady Margaret would secretly follow father to save the person. Lady Margaret arranged for me to stay at Shangguo Temple to wait for news. But no one expected that right at this moment, the most irrevocable thing happened. Just as the sky turned bright, the morning market in the East Market had just opened. Father was waiting for the palace gate to unlock when a wooden wheelbarrow carrying vegetables and fruits suddenly overturned amidst the crowding throng. Not only did the cart owner not stop it, but on the contrary, he panicked and dove straight into the crowd to find a way to escape. The wooden bucket rolled on the ground, spilling half a bucket of vegetables. Everyone joyfully surrounded it to snatch and loot. Who would have guessed that a piercing scream would suddenly ring out from the crowd? Ah, there's a person. There's a person. Catch him, don't let him run. The corpse of a young girl dressed in fine clothes, cruelly folded in half and stuffed into the bucket, was staring with eyes that had lost all spirit, looking straight at the crowd fighting over the vegetables. The entire capital knew a major event had occurred, but specifically what event? Every house closed its doors and did not go out. Dawu and Xiaowu reported all these things to me, saying Lady Margaret's body couldn't hold up and asking me to go there immediately. I asked, what is the specific situation? The two of them kept their mouths shut tight, saying they knew nothing. After considering, I left most of the servants behind, using stillness to control movement, waiting for changes. I handed over the authority to lead the situation at Shangguo Temple to my personal maid Yingzhi. Over here, everything continues as usual. No one is allowed to discuss recklessly. Do what you should do, and wait for my news. But when I rushed to the Marquis's manor, only then did I learn that young girl was Grace. Lady Margaret had just received the news. She held herself for 3 seconds, her eyes stiff and unmoving, then a mouthful of fresh blood sprayed out like a collapsing mountain of jade. Father ground his back molars, immediately leaped onto his horse, and personally led people to surround the East Market. The commoners watching were herded into the surrounding shops, not allowing a single person to leave. First, seal the news. Fortunately, the onlookers reacted very quickly at that time. The vendor pushing the vegetable cart didn't manage to escape and was caught following the clues, along with a whole group of people. Currently, they are tied up at the Marquis's manor. Father also sent someone to invite the top scholar. Now, the inner court of the Marquis's manor is brightly lit with lamps, but it is suffocating to the point of resembling a ghostly realm. Father looks like the king of hell staring at the trembling group of vendors, his face cold as iron. The top scholar, Adrian, didn't say a word. My legs went soft, I almost couldn't stand and had to hold onto the wall. I lowered my voice to speak to Dawu. Xiaowu, take me to see Grace first. At this moment Grace is in her boudoir. In the boudoir, The agarwood incense she loved most in life is burning, but it still cannot cover the faint stench of death. Dao. Xiaowu said the Marquis ordered that no one is allowed to touch her, so she is still wearing the clothes from when she was taken. I trembled as I reached out to lift the white covering her. Her eyes were wide open in horror, mouth slightly ajar, body stiff and bent. I hurriedly shouted toward the door where Dao and Xiaowu were guarding. Has the coroner arrived yet? Xiaowu replied. He's here, but the Marquis won't let the coroner into the inner court, saying he will defile the third miss. Even at a time like this, father is still this stubborn. I was anxious to the point of madness. At this moment Dao, who was naturally steady, looked at me and spoke. Lady Margaret said to tell us to listen to the 7th Miss's arrangements. I froze. Lady Margaret actually entrusted Grace to me. My whole body trembled, but I still had to force myself to suppress it, forcing myself to think about what to do. Invite the coroner in. Use a screen to block him. Let him stand outside. The screen will block his eyes. I ask, he answers. Dawu and Xiaowu quickly arranged everything properly. A hunched figure appeared behind the screen, a zhang away. I trembled as I held Grace's icy, curled hand, starting from the changes in her fingernails, examining bit by bit. When I stepped out of the boudoir, I only felt my head spinning and dizzy. Because I knew that from now on, those peaceful days were likely gone forever. Lady Margaret had woken up, her face pale as a sheet of paper. Seeing me enter, she reluctantly opened her mouth. Nearly every sentence she spoke required a gasp for breath and a soft cough. I killed Grace. 2 years ago, the year she came of age, she should have entered the palace. I knew full well the crown prince was not a good sort, but that is heaven's mandate, that is the imperial decree. I also had no other way. Giving birth to Grace that year nearly took my life. Among the 3 children, she is the only one I raised with my own hands. Mother and daughter have never been apart. I truly couldn't bear to leave her, so I asked for a decree to let her stay with me for 2 more years. She paused, gasping for air. If I hadn't been so selfish. She suddenly grabbed my hand tightly. Grace absolutely cannot die in such an unclear way. After a bout of violent coughing, she said again, help me ask clearly. Investigate the beginning and end thoroughly. Who is the villain? Even if I must risk my life, I absolutely will not let them go. My heart was in pain and panic. I didn't know how to answer. Looking down, I saw that Lady Margaret's key to the household had been stuffed into my hand. Looking up, I met her desperate gaze. Hold up the fort for me. Investigate. You must investigate. At this moment, my heart finally stabilized completely. I didn't answer but instead asked, Mother, recently in the court, have you and father offended anyone? Leaving Grace's place, I felt this matter was likely aimed directly at the Marquis Manor. Grace was merely implicated and dragged into this hopeless disaster. According to the coroner's judgment, Grace died the very night she was taken. The cause of death was suffocation. After death, her body was brutally folded in half by someone and stuffed into the wooden bucket used for vegetables. Her clothes only had 2 pieces of fabric torn from the corner of the skirt, used to wrap the note. Her body was still intact, and there were no obvious wounds or signs of resistance on her person. This indicates she very likely knew the person who took her and climbed out the window voluntarily. But if the person died so early, why continue to demand ransom again and again? Moreover, the numbers were impossible from the start, doubling each time. Yet the person never appeared even once. There is only one possibility: they intentionally wanted to make others believe this was a kidnapping for ransom, aiming to mislead the Marquis Manor and hide the truth. Their true purpose was very likely to sabotage the Crown Prince's grand wedding. With the Crown Princess missing, the wedding naturally could only be cancelled. Who benefits most from this? Lady Margaret forced herself to sit up slowly. Finally, a name was leisurely uttered from her mouth. Prince Felix. The atmosphere in the front hall was tense. The soul-lost top scholar, Adrian, swore upon his deceased father, affirming he absolutely never had an illicit affair with the legitimate daughter of the Marquis Manor. That day, Qihong and Qulu indeed came to find me, only to retrieve the handkerchief I had previously picked up in the Marquis Manor. I observed from a distance behind the screen as Scholar Chen's eyes became bloodshot, his voice choked. That day I picked up a handkerchief in the garden. I searched back and forth along the path and coincidentally met the 3rd Miss, returning to find the handkerchief. Then we chatted. As soon as I met the 3rd Miss, I fell in love. After knowing her identity, I understood clearly that this life was hopeless. My heart was extremely sad. Thinking this, I hid that handkerchief in my sleeve, Unexpectedly, actually, everything was seen by the third miss. He wiped a tear. After Kyuhong and Kyulu left, I knew the grand wedding was coming and had completely given up my thoughts. But no matter what. I never expected that no matter how the Marquis punishes, even if he wants Adrian's life, Adrian absolutely will not utter a word of complaint. The vendor knew he was involved in a heaven-shaking matter, so he spilled everything like pouring beans. He said someone told him to push the cart to the East Market. Once there, he didn't need to worry about it, someone would naturally come to push it away. The other party gave him quite a bit of money, but specifically what was in the bucket, he completely didn't know. While pushing the cart, I just felt something was wrong, the weight wasn't right and the smell was very heavy, but I never, ever expected inside was a person. This vendor is called Chenir. His family background is clean and simple, he has a mother above and a young daughter below. He sells vegetables year-round for a living, he can be considered hardworking, just fond of taking small advantages and greedy for money. His words are likely all truth. Following his clues we tracked down a theater troupe that very night. The person who ordered the vendor was found, but that person was an opera singer. He played the young male lead on stage year-round, but the person was already dead. A sharp blade pierced straight from his back, he was still carrying banknotes on him. It looked like he was silenced while completely off guard. My father examined the knife wound. The technique came from the Imperial Inner Guards. The movement intentionally hit it, but my father, who deals with blades and spears day and night, still saw the flaw. After interrogating the troupe, we discovered that the singer was best at vocal mimicry. Just by listening once, he could imitate another person's voice to the point of being indistinguishable from the real thing. Therefore, this must be the real reason Grace voluntarily climbed out the window. The singer's figure was somewhat similar to top scholar Adrian, the only possibility that could make Grace consider, and then commit such a breach of etiquette, is this one. She heard Adrian's voice suddenly coming from outside the window hidden from the wind, seducing her step by step, thinking that Scholar Chen had lost his reason to do such an improper thing. In her anxiety, she sent her personal maids away, wanting to climb out the window herself to explain clearly to Scholar Chen. Unexpectedly, this trip cost her life. The investigation reached here, and all clues were wiped clean. We couldn't investigate further, but daring to touch the future crown princess, and being able to reach into Angguo Temple to do everything without leaving a trace, and the knife wound originating from the inner guards, then it can only be those few in the palace. On the 6th day, the hour of Mao, which was exactly 1 day before the originally scheduled grand wedding of the crown prince. Inside and outside the imperial palace, joyous lanterns were hung everywhere, preparing to welcome the future daughter-in-law of the royal family. Father and Lady Margaret waited outside the palace gate, waiting for the lock to open to enter and have an audience to state the case. Father could still force himself to hold up, but Lady Margaret was gasping for breath with every step. Every step needed support, yet she still had to force herself to pretend to be calm. Previously, the person standing beside her to support her was always Grace. This time, she insisted I go with her. That was the first time I entered the palace, and also the first time I met Prince Felix. My heart was panicked and uneasy. The emperor supported himself to sit up. From a distance, the dragon face was unclear. After I performed the rites and bowed my head, I didn't look up again. On the contrary, the person sitting beside serving medicine, the moment we entered, she was like a dazzling light piercing straight into people's eyes. Graceful and magnificent to the extreme, unforgettable at a glance. She must be the consort Victoria that Lady Margaret often mentioned, the birth mother of Prince Felix. Beside her was a tall and slender young man, his appearance very similar to Consort Victoria. It was Prince Felix. Consort Victoria was about the same age as Lady Margaret. Before, I always thought my mother Ada's appearance was the most beautiful in the world, but Ada's beauty is a graceful, scholarly beauty, beautiful in a restrained, introverted way. But this Consort Victoria was glamorous to the point of snatching people's eyes. After hearing Lady Margaret's words, Consort Victoria's tone was quite indignant. How can there be such a bold villain, daring to disturb even the crown princess? This Shangguo temple is also too much, being the national temple, yet it leaks like a sieve. How can we not punish strictly? The emperor waved his hand, not even taking his medicine anymore. Due to his chronic, deep-seated illness, although his voice still carried majesty, fatigue. Let the clan court go directly to handle it. How is Grace now? Consort Victoria asked. Lady Margaret replied. Although she was frightened and couldn't get out of bed, she has taken medicine and is now clearly better. This subject. Wife thanks the Emperor and the consort on Grace's behalf for your leniency and love. The Emperor made a conclusion. Tomorrow's grand wedding is temporarily cancelled. Still the same saying, the crown princess can only be the legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Dinuan. Let the Directorate of Astronomy choose another auspicious day. Everyone withdraw for now. Marquis Dinuan stay. Those Confucian merchants have entered the palace. We will not go. The Crown Prince and Prince Felix will meet these moneybags on our behalf. Whether the water control this time is successful or not, whoever presides over it concerns the livelihood of the commoners for 10,000 generations to come. I heard you have already met those merchants. Cough, cough. Then help us supervise a bit. Where is the Crown Prince? Cough, cough. Why has the Crown Prince not arrived yet? Prince Felix stepped forward. Imperial father. This son will immediately send someone to invite Imperial brother. Before entering the palace, Father and Lady Margaret had agreed to decide secretly not to announce the funeral, first hiding the matter of Grace's passing completely tight. After the Emperor finished speaking, Lady Margaret and Father hurriedly bid farewell. But I remembered very clearly, the matter of secretly meeting merchants to gather ransom for Grace had not yet been reported. Clearly, the weather was sunny and hot, but I didn't understand why waves of cold chill rose behind my back. I stood up to leave with Lady Margaret, just a short distance out of the hall. We were called back by Consort Victoria. Lady Hu, are you willing to follow this palace to stroll in the Imperial Garden for a bit? Oh my. This Miss Clara looks truly elegant and beautiful. Why have I never seen you bring her out before? When meeting the Emperor, Lady Margaret had already introduced me. At that time, Consort Victoria didn't even glance at me, yet now she intimately called my name directly. Her beautiful eyes swept up and down over me, then she laughed. Teask, this gesture and demeanor. This appearance doesn't look like a concubine, born daughter at all. On the contrary, she looks like Big Sister Ku's own child. I truly like looking at her. How about marrying her to me as a daughter-in-law? One sentence left me stunned in place, my neck burning hot. I could only bow to pay respects, putting on a compliant appearance. Clara's appearance is plain and ugly, like the Lady of Woyan, extremely crude. Consort Victoria truly praises too much. Unexpectedly seeing my embarrassment, she laughed even more happily. Her laughter was clear as wind chimes. I looked toward Lady Margaret for help, only to see a trace of a smile flash in the corner of her eye. Look at that, you scared the child. Talking nonsense, already a royal consort yet still exactly like a young girl in the boudoir. Only then did I notice that with no outsiders around, Consort Victoria called Lady Margaret Big Sister Clee. Consort Victoria pouted. Fine, 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 I was speaking recklessly. Hemph, I'm not like you, Sister Clee. You are so practical and steady. All these years avoiding me. Now you finally care to pay attention to me. I thought you had forgotten an old friend like me. Lady Margaret said. Times change. Avoiding you before was also out of helplessness. From now on, there are some things that also change. Right at this moment, a young man parted the flowers and willows to arrive. His voice arrived even before the person. It's so hot, what are Mother Consort and Lady Ho doing here? You made your son search for a long time. Everyone looked toward the source of the sound. It was Prince Felix. Consort Victoria pouted. What else? Naturally discussing taking a wife for you. After speaking, she giggled like a bell ringing again. Oh look, you actually know how to blush. Didn't your imperial father tell you to go meet the Confucian merchants? Why are you popping out from here? Go, go, go. Don't disturb me and Lady Hu strolling in the garden. That day, we didn't leave until dusk fell and the palace gates locked. From beginning to end, we never saw the crown prince's shadow. In the listening rain pavilion within the inner court of the Marquis's manor, outside the incense burner, more agar wood was added. Several scent balls were hung from the four corners of the bed. The candlelight was very dim, the faint yellow light cast upon Lady Margaret's face. Lady Margaret had arranged the handling of Grace's body properly. Looking at her now, it seemed she was just sleeping. She wrung out a towel, coughing softly while wiping Grace's face and fingers. What do you think of today's events? Sabotaging the Crown Prince's grand wedding. The ones who can gain the greatest benefit are naturally Prince Felix and Consort Victoria. The Emperor has been seriously ill for a long time. The end is only a matter of time. In the court, regarding the succession to the throne, it has always been divided into two factions. The late Empress was virtuous and held great prestige. She was a young couple with the emperor, so the affection naturally couldn't be compared by the consort. Although the crown prince is mediocre, the forces supporting the crown prince in court have always occupied the mainstream. Only after the empress passed away did this trend begin to turn. Prince Felix is young. When the border was invaded by the strong Qiang enemy, he established war merits many times. Moreover, when assisting the crown prince in handling court affairs, he always puts people's livelihood first, employing people based on talent. Subordinates follow the superior's example. He is very popular with the people. More and more people no longer support establishing the legitimate heir, but lean toward establishing the worthy. But my father, the Marquis of Dinyuan, has a family full of loyal martyrs, holds military power, and has a resounding reputation. Behind the legitimate daughter of the mistress, the Q clan, stands the head of the 4 great noble clans. Even the emperor personally decided the future crown princess can only be the legitimate daughter of the Marquis Manor. This is also one of the reasons why, even though the emperor and the officials are helpless and disappointed with the crown prince's position is as stable as a rock. I took the water basin Lady Margaret had just changed and handed her the jar of plum-scented balm Grace liked best. It wasn't him. Lady Margaret rubbed the balm smooth in her palm, then gently applied it bit by bit to Grace's hand. Why not? Speak. Because it's too stupid. Killing Grace is no different from forming a death feud with the entire Marquis Manor. No matter the reason, there is no need to go to such an extreme with no retreat. Lady Margaret handed the used balm jar to me, her gaze still gently looking at Grace. Continue speaking. I have already considered it carefully in my heart long ago. Since Lady Margaret asked, I slowly spoke out. To the person behind the scenes, Grace's death must have been just an accident. That night, after Grace climbed out the window, she was seduced by that opera singer, but very quickly discovered that person was not Scholar Chen. The singer feared Grace would scream, so he quickly covered her mouth, unexpectedly suffocating her to death directly. I paced slowly, piecing it together. This also explains why the ground outside the window was extremely dry, making it hard to leave footprints, yet there was one spot with very messy trampling marks. He panicked and carried Grace away. Because the weight increased, clear male footprints appeared, but there were no female footprints at all. People in the Marquis Manor immediately discovered Grace was missing. The situation spiraled out of control. Everything exceeded his expectations. He must have hesitated for a long time before deciding to transport the body down the mountain. Therefore, when our people arrived, the water kettle in his room still had warmth. It can be seen that it wasn't arranged long in advance, but all arose from the spur of the moment. I guess the original purpose of the mastermind must have been knowing Scholar Chen admired Grace, wanting to find someone to seduce her before the grand wedding, to tarnish Grace's reputation, not to take her life. Regardless of whether the grand wedding could still proceed afterward, he could profit from it. But unexpectedly, Grace lost her life. The mastermind knew clearly what this meant. The Marquis Manor would absolutely not let it go. Therefore, he made another stupid move. Pretending it was a kidnapping, demanding ransom from the royal family, making the whole Marquis Manor spin around, was actually to blind everyone's eyes so the Marquis Manor wouldn't track it to him. He actually wanted everyone to think the person who took Grace did it for money. I think Mother decided to hide the news of Grace's death, likely to probe the tone of those few in the palace. Initially, I also thought the ones benefiting most in this matter were Prince Felix and Consort Victoria. Everyone knows they don't want the Crown Prince and the Marquis Manor tied tight together. But today I see Consort Victoria is like a person who likes open confrontation, not like someone who feigns concealment. Lady Margaret adjusted the blanket for Grace and slowly stood up. That is exactly why I had to take you into the palace. You guessed correctly. Consort Victoria and I have known each other since we were young, consider us close friends. I understand her temperament very well. Don't look at her beautiful and bewitching appearance. Actually, she is frank, quick, indeed not that kind of person. She sighed. All these years I also refused to meet her privately to avoid suspicion. This matter looks on the surface like the person gaining the most benefit is her and her son. But firstly, it's not like something they would do. Secondly, just as you said, it was done too stupidly. But the deadly crux lies in the fact that the only ones who could do this are only those few in the palace. Lady Margaret stopped her steps, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes. If it wasn't them, then it can only be our crown prince. Now I finally understood. The moment Grace had an accident, standing by the window talking about boudoir matters with me. What did those words she intended to say but stopped regarding the crown prince actually mean? The late empress, having been left with a hidden illness after giving birth to the crown prince, remained bedridden year-round. Consequently, the duties of the central palace fell to consort Victoria to shoulder. Because of the emperor's deep affection for the empress, he was particularly indulgent toward their son, Prince Edward. However, Prince Edward was always attended by his wet nurse, and over time, he developed thoughts toward her that he shouldn't have. The two became almost inseparable day and night. Although hidden from the outside world, within the palace walls, no one was unaware of their illicit closeness. Because Grace was the designated crown princess, she frequently entered and exited the palace. She had long heard rumors of Prince Edward's conduct and scandals. Occasionally, when their paths crossed, the crown prince even used her as a target to vent his anger without cause. That day, when Consort Victoria took Lady Margaret and me for a stroll in the imperial garden, we witnessed, from afar, the spectacle of Prince Edward, blindfolded, flirting with his wet nurse beneath the shadows of the flowers. Lady Margaret's face, already pale, immediately turned ashen. Consort Victoria's gaze shifted to Lady Margaret, then passed over her to look at me with deep, silent meaning. In that moment, all coincidences became reasonable. That's right, at the foot of the Son of Heaven, there are no secrets worth speaking of. What one thinks is hidden, what one thinks is a coincidence, is actually just tacit permission. A way of pushing the boat with the current, under the supervising eyes of power. The Directorate of Astronomy selected a new date half a year later, but it was not officially announced because the Emperor's health deteriorated day by day. The previous attempt to move the wedding up had not only failed to bring luck, but had caused the future crown princess to be frightened into a serious illness. The dragon countenance was greatly enraged. This time, no one dared to determine whether to mention the words, auspicious wedding to counter bad luck. Again, the Dingyuan Manor appeared to conduct business as usual on the surface. Aside from caring for my mother, Ada at night, I spent almost all day by Lady Margaret's side. Mother Ada's courtyard had been moved to a prime location within the manor. Medicine was brewed by specialists every day, and pulse checks were performed by imperial physicians invited from the palace. Mother is worried about you, Ada whispered one evening. You have always known how to keep yourself safe, but since Grace's accident, you suddenly exposed everything before Lady Margaret. Listen to Mother's advice. There are places that look like flowers and brocade, but they are actually rich hell pits. Once your eyes are blinded and you fall in, you won't even know how you died. How could I not understand? But I understood even more clearly. Kindness must be repaid, and hatred must be avenged. Since I had memories, Mother Ada had always been depressed and unhappy. When I was small she wouldn't speak of it. Only when I grew up did I learn what she, and the whole family of my maternal grandfather, had experienced. Mother, this world shouldn't be like this. Why must it be like this? Before, I always hated myself for being so weak, unable to demand justice for grandfather's whole family. So I always thought, don't give me a chance, but now that it's given, I will definitely grasp it, let alone a hell pit. Even if it's a mountain of knives or a sea of fire, today the chance is given. I must charge into it. Mother Ada leaned on the railing shedding tears. Is he okay? I smiled. He is very well, even better than I imagined. But even if he isn't well, it doesn't matter. Mother Ada sighed. I am only afraid I have implicated you. 5 months later, the crown prince suddenly and firmly proposed to marry his own wet nurse as his official primary wife. Before this, he had made a fuss once, but back then, it was merely for a side consort position, and he was willing to wait until the crown princess officially entered the Eastern Palace. I don't know what happened, but this time the crown prince openly caused a disturbance right in front of the seriously ill emperor's dragon bed. He declared he absolutely did not want to be a heartless man again. If not approved, he would kneel indefinitely. I heard the emperor's medicine bowls were smashed several times, and the crown prince's forehead was knocked until it bled. Yet he still refused to yield. He even threatened that if imperial father thought of forcing the wet nurse to death, he would go with her. The emperor fainted on the spot upon hearing this. The entire Imperial Physician Institute was frantically pulled into the palace, guarding all night, yet not a single physician returned. The matter had reached a point of no return. Everyone knew the crown prince was confused, but being confused to this extent truly made one's scalp numb. That very night, I was caring for Mother Ada when Lady Margaret suddenly sent someone to summon me to the ancestral hall. I thought, roughly, the time was ripe. In the ancestral hall, Lady Margaret was kneeling on the floor lighting incense. Perhaps hearing my footsteps, she slowly spoke. I have already notified the clan elders to enter your name under my name in the genealogy. From now on, you are the legitimate daughter of the Dinyuan Manor. I knelt on the floor, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, but directly voicing the worry in my heart. But I am not Mother's biological daughter. This sentence shouldn't have been said, but at this moment, it had to be laid out on the table. I needed a clear alliance. Lady Margaret stood up, the corner of her mouth carrying a cold smile, looking at the ancestral tablets of the husband's family worshipped high above. 38 tablets of dukes and marquises, yet not a single woman. Her eyes suddenly revealed a trace of hatred that was not hidden at all. She directly used her mouth to blow out the burning flame on the incense stick. In this house, from concubines to chambermaids to those outside, your father has a total of 15 children. But in this world, do not look down on us women, although you all share the same blood of one father. Ultimately, who is truly noble? The one who decides is still the woman. Now that I say you are the legitimate daughter, you are the legitimate daughter. If I don't acknowledge it, even if the emperor acknowledges it, it doesn't count. She turned to face me, her gaze steely. I have acknowledged it. Behind you stands the Dinyuan Manor, an old marquise who fought for the empire with the emperor, 2 young generals with illustrious war merits, and my entire maternal Q clan. All will stand behind you. I, the mistress, have acknowledged you, so you are the legitimate daughter. After speaking, Lady Margaret slowly inserted the incense into the burner. I naturally know that what the emperor needs is not the eldest sister Grace, but the entire Dinyuan Manor with its reputation of a house full of loyal martyrs, sparing no effort to support the crown prince's succession. Therefore, they fundamentally do not care if the person marrying into the palace is Grace or not. Lady Margaret's words hammered down, word by word. At this moment, I looked up at her and suddenly felt her figure was strangely tall. What they need is just a legitimate daughter of the Hu family. But I want to let them know, it is not that just any legitimate daughter of the Marquis Manor can marry the crown prince, but only the person the legitimate daughter of my Marquis Manor marries is worthy of being the crown prince. In the 35th year of the Great Chu dynasty, early spring, the emperor passed away. The Dinyuan Marquis and 2 generals, under the banner of clearing the side of the monarch, surrounded and attacked the capital, coordinating inside and out to install Prince Felix. The young Prince Felix ascended the throne as emperor. Empress Clara Hu became the mother of the nation. The decree appointing the empress was sent down, the old case of my maternal grandfather was retried, and finally, the unjust grievances of the past were washed clean. The deposed crown prince and his chosen consort were imprisoned for life in the cold palace by the new emperor to reflect on their mistakes. That night, the madam of the Marquis Manor entered the palace to visit the empress. Mother and daughter talked endlessly throughout the night. On the other side, in the cold palace, the former crown prince and his consort were assassinated and died, yet not a single person discovered the commotion. It is said that both of their bodies were stabbed continuously hundreds of times, riddled like a honeycomb. Folk legends say it was malicious ghosts coming to claim their lives. The tragic saga of the House of Huo illuminates a profound truth: power does not solely belong to those born into the sunlight, but often flourishes in the shadows of resilience. Clara's ascent from an overlooked concubine, born daughter to Empress, proves that destiny is not a matter of birthright, but of will. It reveals the formidable strength of women who, when cornered by cruelty and loss, possess the strategic brilliance to reshape empires. Ultimately, the story reminds us that silence is not weakness, it is a waiting blade, and true justice is often forged in the fires of patient, calculated vengeance. The story ends here for now. If it touched your heart or left you thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share Raccoon Tale to help more stories come to life. See you in the next tale.